mean, we don't think of ourselves as a corrupt nation. We certainly don't think of ourselves as politically corrupt. Are we misguided?
So it's all about how we define corruption. I think there's no country which is zero corruption, if you will. So we certainly shouldn't think of ourselves as a non-corrupt country, but there are certainly challenges that we don't face that other countries do. In this instance, I think it's important. It's quite a simple equation, really. The generally accepted definition of corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And in the instance of the Partygate affair, then all we need to do is decide whether there is incidences of entrusted power. Well, it goes right to the top. This is number 10. There's certainly entrusted power there. Is there an abuse? Well, there's certainly abuses that occurred, and rules were broken. And was there private gain? Well, there were many of us that would have liked to have done all kinds of things, from the relatively trivial, seeing friends, although actually seeing friends isn't all that trivial to many people, to going to funerals, which we weren't allowed to. So there's certainly private gain in engaging in some of the activities that they did. So if we're going by that relatively simple metric, then corruption did occur.
Yeah, and I mean, you say private gain. I think a lot of people tend to think that means, financial of some sort. It's not necessarily, is it? Because particularly in politics, gain can be equated in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, and this is a really good example of where private gain is not just money. Actually, private gain can be, I suppose, to a certain extent, emotional gain, and actually engaging in those activities that we weren't allowed to engage in during the lockdowns, such as just socializing. That was something that was incredibly important to people. I know it was important to me when we were finally allowed to socialize, being able to do that again. So that is a gain which many of us were not. That's an opportunity that many of us were not given. So it's incredibly important. And I think the anger that we've seen from the public, and I don't think the Sue Gray report isn't going to make that anger worse, because in many ways that was set in right at the start of these revelations. The anger that the public felt was because of many opportunities that were felt like was denied to them by those that were setting the rules, who seemingly were not following those rules themselves.
And seemingly aware of it is the other, I think, shocking thing from the Sue Gray report, with the jokes about not waving bottles of wine around and so on and so forth. Of course, Boris Johnson's not out of the. I mean, you've described it as kind of ticking all three of the corruption boxes in terms of what went on, and Boris Johnson's not out of the woods yet anyway, as he's going to be investigated by a Commons committee over whether he misled MPs when talking about parties in Downing Street. Do you think that Sue Gray's report has given us any more of a sense of the questions they're going to be asking the Prime Minister, the places that they will be zooming in on?
So the questions for the Privileges Committee are whether Boris Johnson in many ways misled Parliament or knowingly misled Parliament. I don't think that the Sue Gray report will give the Privileges Committee any further evidence in the sense of whether Boris Johnson knowingly misled Parliament. The defence of Boris Johnson is pretty clearly set now, as we can understand it. It's that all the rules were followed at all the time, and any rules that weren't followed, well, they weren't quite sure they were the rules anyway. So how can you knowingly mislead someone when you're not aware of what the rules are? Now, we can make our own decision about whether that's an effective defence or not broadly, but that's the defence that I think will stand for the Privileges Committee. In the Sue Gray report, we do have other senior members of staff saying, well, along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, it looks like we've got away with this one, or hide your bottles of wine on the way out, and that kind of thing. But that doesn't really still fall back on Boris Johnson beyond the wider culture that he embedded, which is a really important question. But that's not something that the Privileges Committee are looking at. So I suspect, in a sort of purely legal sense, in terms of misleading Parliament, there's nothing in this Sue Gray report that will make it more likely that the Privileges Committee find him guilty of willfully misleading Parliament.